Alrighty, let's take a look at anonymous functions. Before we do that, I hope that last project went well where you created a full tip calculator from scratch. And sort of transitioning from that into some more function-based stuff. So these become a little more JavaScript-y things where an idea like an anonymous function may not exist in every single programming language, but it is definitely a very common thing in the world of JavaScript. When it comes to a function, we have keyword function, whatever your function name is going to be, param1, parameter 2, bunch of stuff, return a thing here. So that's your basic function. So I'm going to go ahead, comment this out, and let's go ahead and look at what an anonymous function looks like. So an anonymous function is a function without a name. And this gets a little bit more into scoping, which we'll talk about a little down the road. Scoping is basically where variables are able to be used or where functions are able to be used. But we'll talk about that down the road. You don't have to be concerned about that right now. Let's take a look at an anonymous function. So an anonymous function can be stored in a variable. So we have variable getName. And then instead of creating a function name, we just give this a regular function, and then we could give it a parameter if we wanted to, but we're not going to at this point. And then just like a regular function, we could return a thing here. So for example, I could return my name, Caleb Tallien. And when I open this up in my browser, if I type getName, oh, it's a function. Look at that. It's not a variable. And if I do type of getName, we're going to see it is a function. So how do we actually get this now? So it looks like a function. Basically, we just stored a function in a variable. Now, to actually make this work, we need to add parentheses because it is a function, not a variable. It just happens to be named as if it's a variable. So we use getName with the parentheses here. Make that a little bigger, and you'll see Caleb Tallien. We can also store this in another variable too. So let's say variable 1. That's what we're going to call it. Variable 1 because I am creative that way. And then I could do console. Let's do a warning. var1. There it is, Caleb Tallien. And so that's really all there is to an anonymous function. Now at this point in time, you're probably thinking, well, why would I ever need that if I could write a regular function? Well, an anonymous function is basically, if you have a bunch of logic or really any logic that you want to perform just once, it doesn't necessarily need to go in a function. Functions are meant to be used over and over again. But if you have grouped code where you're performing some sort of logic, or maybe you're getting a value from the document object model from your HTML, and you're only ever getting it once, well then, maybe putting it in an anonymous function, a function that only ever should be run once, is a good idea. And let's give this a solid example here. So I already have Bootstrap in here, and what I'm going to do is just set up a simple Bootstrap layout. Okay, so here I have container, row, column, no big deal. We have an input text. It has a form control class and a custom one in here called JS custom name. This is the one we're going to want to use here. So in our anonymous function, what we could do is return document dot query selector, put our query selector in there, dot value. And now the name is going to be whatever we tell it to be. So if I refresh our page here, we have an input. It's actually at the very top of the page, so it's kind of hard to see. But if I say John Smith, and then I execute getName, my name is John Smith. So now I could say, so now I could change this to anything, Caleb Tallien. And down here I could run getName again, just like a regular function, or I could store this in a name. So I could say name is equal to getName. And now name will always be name no matter how many times I change it. So if I change this back to John Smith and I type in name, it stays as Caleb Tallien because we got the original name and then we stored it as a variable. Now the big thing here is when you're using an anonymous function, really you should only be trying to use it once. You have 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe more lines of code, and it's all just supposed to go into a regular variable. So instead of storing this as a variable, what we can do is we can use getName as a function almost as if it were a variable. So let's go ahead and do console.log, hi, my name is, and let's concat getName in here as a function, not as a variable. And it says, hi, my name is John Smith. And if I change this back to Caleb Tallien, and I rerun this exact same thing, it's going to change. It's going to say, hi, my name is Caleb Tallien. And so there is a use case for this. We're not going to get into this too much right now, but down the road, you're going to see a lot of this in more advanced JavaScript. And then if we wanted to actually make this run automatically, so we don't have to run this every single time, we can just run it as soon as the page loads, we can wrap this in parentheses, add 2 more sets of parentheses at the end, and a semicolon, and this is what we call an immediately invoked function, an IIFE. We'll talk more about this in the next lesson, but basically this is going to run right away. So if I refresh the page here and I type getName, not as a function, but as a variable, we can see that it's already run. Happens to be there's nothing in there, so let's go ahead and change this default value, and let's do Kylo Ren. So default value here is Kylo Ren, and if I get rid of this and type getName, it says Kylo Ren. So now we have a function that's automatically running just once and storing it as a variable name called getName. And that's how we use immediately invoked functions. Again, we'll talk more about these in the next lesson. So I'm just going to undo this. For your task in this lesson, there actually is no task. I'll keep that there. Again, this is just something that's really good to know. You're going to see this a lot more down the road when you start sort of getting out into the JavaScript wild. You're going to use these a lot more often. But essentially it works the exact same way as a function, so you could pass in a parameter if you wanted to, and then you could call it as if it was a regular function.